Chapter 8. Do healings ever get captured on video? Some years ago, when I presented a public lecture at Wheaton College on the subject of miracles, a science professor there reasonably asked why healings were never caught on video. The short answer is that sometimes they are. Since that time, I have found many videos of healings. Unfortunately, many videos posted online are of uncertain authenticity because with sufficient funds or expertise, unscrupulous marketers can fake videos, just as charlatans can fake cures in person. Some experiences, however, cannot reasonably be faked, and video can sometimes help substantiate these cures. In this chapter, I focus on a particular case in greater detail. Feeling in her legs. Injured by a drunk driver in a terrible car accident, Delia Knox was confined to a wheelchair for more than 22 years because of nerve damage. Because she was a widely noted singer, her paralysis was public knowledge throughout this period, attested in many newspaper articles and videos that are still widely available online. For years, Knox prayed for healing, but after 10 years she began to lose hope. She came to dread healing services, where at times well-intentioned but apparently rash ministers tried to pull her from her chair, expecting her to walk. One night during a crowded conference service, however, evangelist Nathan Morris prayed over Knox. Others have also experienced healing when Morris prayed. Suddenly she began to feel something in her legs, though she had not felt anything there for 22 years. With her husband and other ministers helping to support her, she began to walk. Video captured these first steps. Internet critics scoffed that Knox needed support to walk, ignoring the fact that she was the one controlling legs that she had never moved for 22 years. Her muscles were still atrophied, so she had to relearn how to walk. Another video shows Knox marching into a church service 3 weeks later, stable and ready to pray for others' healing. How did critics respond now? Some scoffed that after one's muscles had atrophied for 22 years, one would not be able to walk so quickly. Not only is this the exact opposite of the earlier complaint, it misses the point. Hardline skeptics do not want to call anything that could possibly happen naturally a miracle. But when God does something that cannot happen naturally, they deny that any such thing is possible. How can one explain the disappearance of paralysis after 22 years? Since Knox was now obviously able to walk, some internet critics insisted that she had simply faked paralysis for 22 years so she could claim healing now. They were actually suggesting that someone would endure more than 2 decades of not walking in public just to claim a miracle later. This sort of skeptical speculation convinced me of only one thing, that some hard skeptics will go to any lengths to avoid believing. Some who demand evidence are really not open-minded enough to accept any. Before my own conversion, I was an atheist, but I valued truth enough to want to follow where the evidence led. Fake miracles exist, but this one cannot qualify as such. Delia Knox's friends. Delia Knox's previous disability was well-documented public knowledge. But even had I lacked access to such documentation, I soon encountered people who knew her. I heard Knox's story originally because one of her old friends shared news of it with a friend of mine. When I was lecturing for a conference at Northeastern Seminary in Rochester, New York, I learned further details. When I recounted what I knew by then of Knox's story, Bob Tice, a pastor from Buffalo, New York, Knox's hometown, offered his direct insight and some details I hadn't known. Before planting a new church in inner-city Buffalo, Tice had been one of the pastors at the Tabernacle, Knox's original home church in Buffalo. Because she was disabled, he had often helped lift her up onto the platform when she would sing. He witnessed how valiantly she labored against her physical struggles. Tice connected me with Bishop Tommy Reed, Knox's then 84-year-old former pastor at the Tabernacle in Buffalo. In recent decades, Reed has helped spearhead the urban renewal of that city. Because I was traveling for the next couple of weeks, I delayed calling him. On the afternoon of Friday, July 8, 2016, however, I felt an urgency to call right away. To my amazement, Reed noted that Knox and her husband were sitting across from him at that very moment. They happened to be visiting Buffalo, so I was able to talk with her directly. Bishop Reed noted that he had known Delia Knox well for many years. She was like a second daughter to him, and his daughter always calls Knox her little sister. In his younger days, Reed had been healed from polio, and he had witnessed many extraordinary miracles. But he now considered Knox's healing the most extraordinary miracle he knew firsthand, because she had not walked for more than 20 years. Before the miracle, she couldn't have felt her legs even if someone had driven a nail through them, he explained. She was singing from her wheelchair for Reed's church when she met her husband, Bishop Levy Knox. Bishop Reed even officiated at their wedding. Because of Delia Knox's wheelchair, however, he had never been able to look at her eye to eye without getting down on his knees. He tried to describe for me his emotion on the day when he first saw her eye to eye, when she returned to Buffalo after the miracle. I'll never forget the first time when I could look directly in her face. She walked off the plane pushing the wheelchair with her luggage in it. The conference at which I spoke in Rochester had been in June. The next time I recounted Knox's story was in July at a Methodist Renewal Conference. When I told what I knew of the story, a minister there named Gregory Holinsky informed me that he had attended Tommy Reed's church in Buffalo for 10 years. Holinsky was involved in the music ministry at the church and knew of Knox's disability, though he thought of her especially as a spirit-filled woman of God with an extraordinary singing voice. She often sang at church, but her ministry went far beyond her singing. As she spoke about God's love, she was exuberant and joyful, as if she would love to dance as well as sing, if she were able. Every time Holinsky saw her, Knox was confined to her wheelchair. With much effort, some people would push or lift her onto the platform in her wheelchair. There was no sign that she could use her legs. Her chair, as far as my perception was concerned, was part of who she was. Years later, after moving to Ohio, Holinsky saw a Facebook video of a woman leaving her wheelchair and being able to walk. It was clear that this was Delia Knox, and it was so amazing to him that he called his mother and father-in-law, who still attended the church in Buffalo and had been ushers there for some 20 years. Yes, they confirmed, Delia is now able to walk by the miraculous hand of God. Still later, when I gave a guest lecture at Houghton College in New York State, someone else in that room also had known Knox and testified directly to her healing. By that point, though, further interviews seemed superfluous. Spiritual backstory. Long before Delia Knox's healing, various ministers who passed through her church had prophesied that one day she would be healed. This was not something they prophesied to everyone who was disabled. There was simply a consistent sense from the Spirit regarding Knox. Bishop Reed often reminded her of this. Indeed, most of her friends had confidence that she would be healed. Over time, though, the prophecies faded. Her sister Enid notes, "I knew she would be healed in heaven." About a month before Knox's healing, however, someone called Enid and unexpectedly prophesied again that Knox would be healed, and this time Enid felt differently about it. Knox might well be healed in this life. On the night that Delia Knox was healed, she was deeply moved with compassion for an ill baby. She was not praying for her own healing, but when she prayed for the baby, feeling began to return to her own legs. She and her husband believe that compassion helped unlock the miracle. When feeling returned to her legs, She needed both faith to try to move them as best she could, and humility to not care what people thought if she fell. The test of her faith did not end with 22 years of disability or her act of faith during the service. Her nerves now worked, but in contrast to Barbara Comiskey-Snyder's healing, described in the preface, Knox's muscles remained atrophied from years of disuse. When she got home after the service, she again could not walk, nor could she walk in the Sunday church service. In faith, she had to keep exercising the new gift of mobility, trying until she built up enough muscle strength to walk normally. Even once she could walk, her feet, unaccustomed to being flat on the ground, remained painful at first. But soon she was walking again. Some weeks after Knox's healing, she returned to visit her home church. When Bishop Reed escorted her to see her mother, he suggested to her mother, "You must be thrilled to see her walking." This was the first time Knox's mother had seen her walk in over 20 years. She responded, "I knew she'd be healed. I knew this all the time." Now, in Knox's home church, 1,000 people who had known her for years in her wheelchair gathered to celebrate her healing. There are many other examples of healings captured on video, some of which are noted in my previous book on miracles. But Delia Knox's decades of public presence in a wheelchair make her case particularly conspicuous. As noted earlier, an inflexible skeptic actually posted online that Knox must have faked her disability for 2 decades so she could later claim healing. When that is the best public argument that a hard skeptic can muster, skepticism is walking on thin ice. Chapter 9. Medically Attested Catholic Cures. Partly because of often justifiable Protestant complaints about late medieval Christian gullibility and fake relics, the Roman Catholic Church began to put strict protocols in place for testing healing claims. Sometimes these protocols have been so strict as to exclude from consideration even most events that we would probably regard as miracles. But this approach means that the miracle reports that do pass muster in these conditions have a very high degree of certainty. Other cures in Roman Catholic contexts appear elsewhere in the book. I separate this chapter from others in Part 3, partly to keep each chapter concise. Already in Chapter 6, I noted the medically verified healing of Pascal's niece in 1656. Over the past 4 centuries, the Roman Catholic Church has reported more than 1,400 miracles, often with considerable testimony and medical documentation associated with saints and other figures. As a Protestant myself, I do not share all the theology connected with these healings, or, for that matter, all the theology connected with many of the other healings recounted in this book. But I do believe in a God who hears the desperate cries of his children, whether these cries are directly or implicitly addressed to him. I pause to address this objection only because some voiced it in response to the previous book. Indeed, despite the still somewhat polemical character of the age, even a number of prominent 19th century evangelicals, such as A.B. Simpson, affirmed the genuineness and divine character of such Roman Catholic miracles while disagreeing with some Catholic theology. If God answered only prayers that were theologically precise, probably few people of any theological persuasion would be healed. Protestants, too, have reported healings at the Catholic shrine at Lourdes, and one of the major 20th century publications regarding Lourdes comes from a sympathetic Protestant author. Nor are such observations limited to Christians. A friendly atheist medical historian authored one of the best and most thorough studies of Catholic medical documentation available. After examining medical evidence from past cases of healings attributed to saints, she acknowledges that many of these were miracles, which she defines as cures of conditions that were in those eras incurable. various Catholic reports. In over 100 cases in the Vatican dossiers, doctors acknowledged their astonishment at patients' inexplicable recoveries. I include here only a small sample of reports. For example, in 1824, Anne Mattingly had suffered for 7 years from an ulcerated back and had a tumor the size of a pigeon's egg. She was considered beyond medical help at the time, but in Washington, D.C., on March 10, 1824, she recovered within hours after receiving the sacrament. 35 affidavits affirmed the genuineness of her sickness and recovery. When 2-year-old Teresa Benedicta McCarthy swallowed 16 times the lethal dose of Tylenol on March 20, 1987, the Massachusetts General Hospital warned that she would die unless she received a liver transplant. After a few days of requests for the intercession of the saint for whom she had been named, her liver and kidneys recovered fully without a transplant. Her main physician, Dr. Ronald Kleinman, associate professor of pediatrics at Harvard Medical School, was Jewish. He considered her cure miraculous, reporting the cure both to the Vatican and in a 1997 interview with CBS Evening News. Benedict Heron, prior of the Benedictine Monastery of Christ the King in Cockfosters, North London, recounts many cures, providing comments from physicians. For example, one doctor was bedridden from malignant tumors of the spine, and other physicians had relinquished hope for him. He was then healed after being anointed with oil by women from a British Catholic charismatic prayer group. We lack reports of this condition naturally disappearing after it has reached such an advanced stage. In another case, the medical editors of Heron's book note that severe heart failure with fluid in the lungs following several heart attacks almost invariably leads to near incapacity and ultimate death. Yet they report a case of complete healing. Victor Agbiber is a medical doctor, as is his wife, Cottrell, whom I have known since our time at Duke University some 30 years ago. They attend a non-denominational church, but when Victor was extremely sick in Ghana many years ago, a Catholic charismatic priest who had once been schoolmates with his mother prayed for him. Victor's malaria had become so severe that he developed hemolytic anemia. His urine was turning red from his red blood cells breaking down. This condition required medical treatment such as blood transfusions, so he was about to make his way to Accra, Ghana's capital. The priest said that this trip wouldn't be necessary. He instructed Victor to kneel, explaining that he would lay hands on him and pray. After praying, the priest declared, "Your faith has made you well." Immediately, Victor recounts, my fever went away. When I went to urinate the next time, it was all clear. I never needed any medication. Some dramatic cures at Lourdes. Most pilgrims to Lourdes are not ill, and most who are do not experience dramatic cures. Nevertheless, the latter do receive spiritual and emotional as well as medical care there, which is especially meaningful to those facing the end of their earthly lives. For those whom I met in terminal stages of illness, one physician explains, biomedicine can only provide a pain-free and comfortable death. It cannot help them accept their situation and prepare themselves to meet God. But dramatic cures do occur at Lourdes. Whatever one makes of some of the roughly 7,000 claims, some, for which medical documentation remains available, seem impressive. In 1878, a gangrenous ulcer on Joachim Duhan's right leg was 12 inches by 6 inches and had penetrated to the bone. Her companions on the train, nauseated by the odor, vomited. Nevertheless, the second time she bathed in the pool at Lourdes, she was healed within 2 or 3 hours. Only a scar remained. Investigators gathered testimony not only from physicians at Lourdes and her own physicians who had treated her for over a decade, but also from her traveling companions, family, and others who knew her in her hometown. Tuberculosis, while treatable today, was not medically curable in the era in which such cures appear in the medical bureau's records. Tuberculosis sometimes goes into remission spontaneously, but some cases do not appear to fit the profile of such natural remissions. For example, Mademoiselle Brosse had large abscesses and was dying, yet within hours was so fully healed that the wounds had closed and she could walk under her own power. Even were we to explain such cures purely naturally, other cases surely elude such explanations. Consider, for instance, the case of Francis Pascal, cured of blindness and paralysis of the lower limbs at the age of 3 years and 10 months on August 28, 1938. While the keenness of his vision remained less than the average person's, this child, who had been completely blind before the cure, was soon an active reader and writer. Other blind persons were also cured of documented organic optic atrophy, able thereafter to see. One might also consider Marie Bigot, cured of blindness, deafness, and hemiplegia on October 10, 1954. Unable to walk and deemed an invalid owing to verified physical causes, the nearly blind Serge Perrin visited Lourdes and, on May 1, 1970, was anointed. Within hours, his vision unexpectedly returned fully, and he was able to walk unaided. Doctors verified that no trace of his previous medical problems remained. 6 years later, in view of his continued health, the cure was recognized by the Church as miraculous. The medically documented instantaneous healing of a swollen and paralyzed arm drew public attention and television coverage in France in 1954 and 1960. As already suggested, standards at Lourdes are so strict that they undoubtedly screen out many genuine cures. The Medical Bureau at Lourdes officially endorses only a minute percentage of cures, those that both medical examiners and theologians consider airtight. Of some 7,000 claims of unexplained cures, the Bureau has endorsed only 70, that is 1%. For example, in one case not endorsed, a Methodist visitor was immediately healed at Lourdes of much of her naturally incurable blindness due to macular degeneration, though she still cannot see perfectly. The Lord at Lourdes? In one half-year period noted by a journalist, April to October 1965, some 1,600 physicians from 32 nations and a diverse range of religious or non-religious perspectives visited the Medical Bureau at Lourdes, where they were able to examine the evidence for themselves. The fact that infants and unbelievers have been healed precludes purely psychosomatic explanations in those cases. Other observers, reticent to endorse a supernatural explanation and emphasizing the possibility of prayer stimulating psycho-neuroimmunological and biochemical healing, still recognize that many of the cures exceed present medical explanation. In 1902, Alexis Carrel, who did not believe in miracles himself, but had learned that patients of his had been cured at Lourdes, decided to investigate. On the train, he cared for a dying girl, Marie Bailly, who was also traveling there. Her abdomen was swollen, she had periodontitis, and was deathly pale and skeletal, and he believed that she was in danger of dying at any moment. At Lourdes, she was removed from the train by a stretcher, with almost no pulse. To the stupefaction of the physicians, she was cured, the tumors vanishing in front of them. One astonished medical observer added that such a serious affliction has never been cured naturally in a few hours like the case on record here. Because Carrel was now interested in miracles, the University of Lyon medical faculty rejected him in 1905. He joined the Rockefeller Institute instead, and in 1912 received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. His memoir of the healing was published only later. Although he prescinded from supernatural explanations, Carrel believed that science should study factors at Lourdes that could be used in medical healing. One scholar who articulates a more skeptical approach grants that some utterly extraordinary cures have occurred at Lourdes. He notes that enemies of the Catholic Church and leading medical scientists such as Alexis Carrel have been persuaded by the data, and reports that scientists unanimously concur that these healings take place there. Among clearly non-psychosomatic cures, he includes the instant healing of a terribly disfigured face and the instantaneous healing of a club foot on a 2.5-year-old child, shown by non-Catholics to be permanent. Further, he cites a news article about a 3-year-old with terminal cancer whose bones were being eaten away. After the healing, even the bones in her skull grew back. Her doctor, a Protestant, said that miracle would not be too strong a word to use. Nevertheless, this scholar concludes that a natural explanation would be possible if only sufficient evidence were available, even if such cases have happened only 1 in a million times. What makes the scholar so sure that a natural explanation must be possible? It seems that such certainty reflects an inflexible commitment to an exclusively natural explanation always being the most plausible one. By this approach, one cannot accept any evidence for miracles because one will always be required to dismiss such evidence. One's assumptions predetermine one's conclusion. Granted, anomalies occur, and the fact that a recovery is medically inexplicable today does not mean that it will always be inexplicable. Biblical theology itself does not deny that God works through natural causes. In the Bible, God usually does work this way. Moreover, a biblical perspective recognizes divine providence even in easily explicable recoveries. But, as I noted in Part 1, evaluation of miracles also depends on the assumptions one brings to the discussion. If someone demands medical evidence for miracles, such evidence is available. If a person rejects such evidence by saying, "I will not accept that God did it, even if I lack a better explanation than 1 chance in a million," this says more about that person's assumptions than it does about evidence. How much more is that the case when they appealed to this explanation for many such cases? Chapter 10. A few vignettes of brain recovery. This is one of the book's shortest chapters, since more detailed accounts of brain recovery follow later in the book. Testimonies abound of recovery from near-death experiences, and they are not by any means confined to believers, especially given current technology. Some of these cases are more significant for our subject than others. When the person's heart has not pumped blood to the brain for 4 or more minutes, we have reason to expect permanent brain damage. When the person ends up with little or no brain damage, we see that as extraordinary, even if not unparalleled. Believers thank God for what we see as divine activity in overcoming brain damage and near-death experiences, and believers usually define such experiences as miraculous. Such events seem providential and medically rare, but are not naturally impossible when effective CPR, or a fairly limited time frame, has allowed oxygen to reach the brain. Some listeners might thus debate some of the examples in this chapter, depending on their starting assumptions. If you are tempted to disregard accounts in this chapter, you may find further insight in Chapter 11, which recounts a recovery from virtual brain death. Beyond that, Part 5 of this book, chapters 24 through 31, contains accounts of raisings from the dead, in the majority of which death had lasted longer than in the accounts related here. Nevertheless, the following accounts remain intriguing, and most differ from usual expectations. Certainly, believers experience such cases as miraculous. For example, on June 9, 2018, 9-year-old Annie Powell drowned in warm water. She was without oxygen for roughly 10 minutes. Most of her upper body was blue, and her eyes had rolled back in her head. Medical staff worked hard, and Annie's Assemblies of God Church prayed hard. Less than a week after the accident, Annie walked out of the hospital without brain damage. This does not appear as dramatic as recovery after an hour without oxygen, but neither is it a typical outcome. Overdose. On May 29, 2014, at the age of 24, Dina Cafiso overdosed on heroin. Her mother, Maria, found her face down, and her brother called 911. The emergency medical team reports that her heart stopped for 10 minutes, but they and hospital personnel continued to labor over her. The CT scan and her curled hands suggested the possibility of significant brain damage. Maria was already a person of prayer, but now she began pouring her heart out desperately to God to give Dina another chance. She continued to express her trust in God despite subsequent hard news about Dina's fever and pneumonia. After a week, Dina awoke from her medically induced coma without brain damage, but with nerve damage in her left arm, on which she had been lying when her mother found her. For Dina, however, the experience was a wake-up call. She devoted her life to God and entered rehabilitation through Brooklyn Teen Challenge. Through prayer and therapy, she recovered full use of her left arm and now helps lead worship on her electric guitar. When I corresponded with Maria and Dina, both continued to overflow in their gratitude to God. Traffic accidents. On April 10, 2003, a pickup truck smashed into Natalie Elder's car near Asheville, North Carolina. An MRI showed that the impact had almost completely severed her brainstem. Doctors concluded that she would be a lifetime quadriplegic if she ever woke up. Her husband, Dwayne, solicited widespread prayer, but on Good Friday, April 18th, the doctor warned that she would never wake up without divine intervention. On Monday, they would need to make a decision about whether to take her off life support. Before that time arrived, she woke up on Easter Sunday morning. Within 2 weeks, she was sent to a rehabilitation center. While doctors did not expect her release until after Christmas, more than 8 months away, she walked out in May. Dr. Edgardo Diaz notes her relatively quick recovery, considering that she arrived needing total care. Valerie Patters was injured and near death after a traumatic accident. At least one source in the hospital suggested that life support was sustaining her so that her surviving organs could help someone else in need. While her sister Cheryl travailed in prayer, Valerie experienced Jesus' presence in heaven. Valerie and Cheryl shared some spiritual experiences independently during this time. Although a painful convalescence followed Valerie's unexpected return to physical consciousness, her near-death experience brought her an extraordinary, fresh revelation of Jesus' love for her. Giving up. Some years ago, PAX TV's program It's a Miracle researched and reported the case of Isaias Sevilla. After successful medical intervention for his otherwise terminal cancer, Isaias's lungs suddenly collapsed and filled with blood. His entire body was shutting down. His wife, Sylvia, kept praying, but eventually the doctors suggested that she disconnect life support. That evening, Sylvia visited her husband one last time, praying. When the technician shut off life support, however, there was suddenly a commotion behind the curtain. Isaias sat up alive, as if nothing had ever happened. The doctor testified that he had never seen anyone in this condition recover so fully. Isaias returned home well 21 days later. Running back. In contrast to stories reported by It's a Miracle or other national outlets, sometimes extraordinary recoveries invite only local media coverage. For example, one January morning in southern Ohio, 2-year-old Malachi Reisig was running around while his mother, Kelly Reisig, was chatting with her sister on the phone and making breakfast. Realizing she had not heard her son for a few minutes, Kelly stepped into the living room and, horrified, dashed the phone to the floor. Malachi had accidentally hanged himself from a treadmill cord and was already stiff, his eyes fixed. Malachi's father, Jim, reached the local hospital just before Malachi was to be airlifted to the Children's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. The physician explained that it appeared that Malachi's oxygen had been cut off for nearly 10 minutes. If he survived at all, he would probably be a vegetable. Glancing at his unmoving child, Jim Reisig broke down, fell to his knees, and began crying out to God. To the astonishment of everyone in the room, color began to return to Malachi's body, and the swelling visibly diminished. So how did things turn out for Malachi in the long run? My account comes, in this case exclusively, from the September 19, 2013 sports section of the Chillicothe Gazette. The newspaper reported Malachi's baby story because he was now, at age 15, a running back for the local football team. Chapter 11. Back from Virtual Brain Death. Chapter 10 included some vignettes of brain recoveries experienced as miracles by those who prayed. These accounts usually include medical intervention fairly soon after cardiac arrest. Sometimes, however, so much of the brain is dead that reviving it is, even with today's best medical resources, technically impossible. This chapter recounts the story of a young man in that condition. Impact. Years ago, one of the testimonies featured on It's a Miracle was that of 16-year-old Dallas Pullum, nearly killed in a terrible accident. Regional news outlets covered the story. In 2002, Larry King interviewed the family on CNN, and It's a Miracle publicly displayed the medical documentation. 18 years later, I caught up with the Pullums as they recounted the fateful day of the accident and the intense weeks that followed. I learned several morals from the story. One of them is the importance of keeping your promises. A couple of weeks before the accident, Dallas and his mother, Regina, both began to have night anxieties about Dallas's safety, and Regina began praying for his safety. 2 nights before the accident, Regina dreamed that Dallas had experienced a wreck, but was standing beside his vehicle without a scratch on him or the vehicle. He held out both hands and said, "It's okay, Mama. I'm going home." Regina would soon have reason to believe that this meant going home to be with Jesus. On April 7, 2000, as Dallas was heading out, Regina and her husband Stevie each told him, "I love you, be careful," as they regularly did. But as Dallas and a friend were racing on their four-wheelers, the vehicle occupied by Dallas and his girlfriend, Christina, collided with another vehicle. Christina's arm was broken, but Dallas, who was not wearing a helmet, was hurled into a windshield, lacerating his head and throat. Dallas's brother Wayne confesses that the accident was the scariest day of my life. By the time Wayne reached Decatur General Hospital, Dallas was bleeding from his ears, eyes, mouth, and throat, yet was still conscious and in agony. "Am I going to be okay?" Dallas pleaded. "Yeah, buddy, you're going to be all right," Wayne assured him. "Do you promise me?" Dallas pressed. "Yeah, Dallas, I promise you, buddy," Wayne responded. But Dallas no longer looked as though he was going to be all right, and the hospital was preparing to transfer him to one of Alabama's leading trauma centers in Huntsville. As Wayne spoke with his mother outside, he confessed, "Mama, I just did something I said I'd never do. I'd never told Dallas a lie, but I may have just lied to him." On the way to Huntsville, Dallas began to decline quickly. His father was in the transport vehicle, and his heart sank. He feared they had lost him. Trauma surgeon Deepak Katyal notes that roughly an hour after Dallas reached Huntsville, he experienced a seizure that revealed that his apparently minor head injury was not actually minor. By the time the family got to Huntsville, Dallas's brain was swelling and he was placed in a medically induced coma. Doctors warned that even far less intracranial pressure than Dallas was experiencing usually causes brain damage. Insufficient blood was reaching his brain, and over the next few days, CT scans showed his brain cells irrecoverably dying. Losing Dallas. Regina could not yet bear to see her son in this condition, but Stevie and Wayne spent time with him. His hand was cold, Wayne notes. He looked dead. As Wayne shared with me his memory of that occasion, he was racked with sobs and struggled to regain his composure. I just couldn't handle the last thing I said to him being a lie. Wayne says that he could not sleep for days until exhaustion finally overtook him involuntarily. In the hospital chapel, I prayed harder than I'd ever prayed in my life. One day, as he was crying out to God, he heard a voice in his heart as clear as if it came from outside. Dallas would be okay. After that, I told Mama and Daddy that he's going to be okay. But his parents, struggling with their own grief, urged Wayne to face reality. Doctors had already shown them the scans of his brain. Anything you see black in the brain is dead, the doctor had explained. The scan of a normal brain looked mostly white. The scan of a brain with partial function had more black. The latter is common in severe brain injuries, and the condition is irreversible. The scan of Dallas's brain was completely black, except for 3 small white spots, the only places that had not been starved of oxygen. He lacked brainstem function, and was for all practical purposes brain dead. If Dallas woke up at all, he would be a vegetable, so one doctor was pressing them to donate his organs. Dallas was virtually dead already. Life support was merely preserving his organs. One day, some doctors called family members into the meeting room. "You might as well accept the fact that your brother's dead," a physician admonished sadly. "Do you believe in miracles?" Wayne demanded. "Yes, I do," the doctor replied, "but I don't see one happening here. With the kind of damage we see here, it's medically impossible." Wayne felt his temper rising. "But you do believe in miracles?" he repeated. "Yes," the doctor explained patiently, "but this isn't going to be one." The doctor was speaking on the basis of considerable experience. Other families prayed for loved ones too, but at this stage recovery was virtually impossible, like raising the dead. Wayne's parents kept trying to help Wayne accept his brother's death. "These doctors know what they're talking about," they explained. "No, not in this case," Wayne objected. "Normally it's right to believe the doctors, but the one who's telling me something different outweighs their opinion. Just have a little faith." Mustard seed. Wayne confesses, "I didn't read my Bible the way I should, but I know that I'd heard that the faith of something as small as a mustard seed can move something as big as a mountain. God told me he was going to heal my brother, and the good Lord's not going to lie. Anybody can have just that little bit of faith like a mustard seed." On the basis of the doctor's extensive trauma experience, however, Regina and Stevie made the difficult decision to take Dallas off life support. When Wayne learned of this, he sat down by his cousin Ronald, who was like a brother to him. "It's not his time to die," Wayne insisted. Ronald agreed. Ronald had lost his own brother, Billy, and said that he kept dreaming that Billy was telling him that Dallas would be okay. "You need to try to talk your mama out of this, or you'll never be able to let go of this." Wayne took Regina outside to the parking deck, insisting, "I need to talk to you away from everybody." "Dallas ain't ready to die," he pleaded. "Don't let them take him off life support." Regina was crying and repeated what the doctors had said. "I know what they're saying," he agreed, "but I can't live without my brother." Finally, Regina relented, feeling that Wayne was simply emotionally exhausted and needed a little more time to let Dallas go. "I'll give you one more day if you promise to come home and get some rest. But after that, you need to accept what the doctors said." He consented. They returned to the room and told the nursing staff, "Wayne isn't ready to let go of his brother yet. Maybe tomorrow." The nurse called the doctor, who was already on the way up to detach life support. As they left the building, Wayne hesitated. "I can't leave him." "You promised," she reminded him. She needed him home with her, Stevie, and their daughter to try to remember and cherish the good times they had had with Dallas. And Wayne needed to get some rest. "I know I promised, and Dallas wouldn't want me to break a promise, but I just feel like I need to be with him." They lived in rural Alabama, about an hour from the hospital. Wayne knew that his mother would not bring him back to the hospital that night, and Wayne, who was legally blind, could not drive there himself. Ronald broke the mounting impasse. Although he lived an hour further away from the hospital, he said to Wayne, "Go on home with your mother. If you feel you need to come back later, I'll give you a ride." Wayne made him promise, and then went home with Regina. When they reached home, Regina picked out Dallas's clothes to bury him in, including the shirt he had worn to school the previous Friday. Broken-hearted, Stevie made arrangements at the funeral home, picking out the casket. Wayne spent time with the family, but that night he called Ronald, who had just gotten home. "I really feel like I need to get back to the hospital." "Are you serious?" his dismayed cousin asked. But Wayne reminded Ronald of his promise. "Okay," Ronald acquiesced. "I'll see you in an hour." As Ronald's car pulled up, Regina asked, "Who'd be here at this time of night?" Someone wanting to console them surely wouldn't come this late. She started to cry as Wayne explained that he was going back to the hospital. "You promised." "I kept my promise," he answered. "I came home and got rest, but I need to go back." New beginnings. A surprise awaited Wayne at the hospital. Dallas had just emerged from 6 days in a coma. You couldn't tell he was any different from looking at him, but the heart monitor and all the stats were better. Wayne took Dallas's right hand and said, "If you can hear me, squeeze my hand." Dallas's fingers closed around Wayne's hand. Wayne called the nurse. "It's just an involuntary spasm," she explained calmly. "Dallas, you've got to show us right now that you're not ready to go," Wayne begged desperately. Suddenly, Dallas squeezed his hand again, multiple times. "Oh my God," the nurse exclaimed. "Let me get the doctor." The doctors didn't know what to make of this new situation. "We have pictures. This boy has no brainstem function." But Dallas was responding fully. Something had happened to his brain. Wayne wasn't allowed to call his parents immediately for fear that the news would shock them too much, but a surprise greeted them when they returned to the hospital. Dallas tightly squeezed his mother's hand, and when his father announced his presence, Dallas released his mother's hand and squeezed his father's. "We were in utter disbelief at this point," Dr. Katyal notes for the televised It's a Miracle interview. "I have no other way of describing this except that it was a miracle." But Dallas's recovery was only beginning. Although he could use his right hand, the left side of his body remained paralyzed. Doctors warned that he would probably not regain much movement on his left side, but Wayne insisted, "The good Lord don't start something and then not finish it." Attached to a ventilator, Dallas could not speak, but his gestures soon let Wayne know that he wanted to communicate. Wayne asked the nurse for a pencil and paper. "He can't write," she explained, but Wayne insisted, so she shrugged and brought him one. Dallas immediately wrote, "Who did I hit? Are they okay?" He had no memory of the accident himself. "They're fine," Wayne assured him. Dallas kept writing notes, to the appreciative amazement of the staff. While at the hospital, Wayne ran into the trauma doctor who had said that a miracle would not happen in this case. "I eat my words," the doctor offered humbly. "From now on, I'll be careful what I tell families about their faith." Still, Dallas was not out of the woods yet. One day his fever reached 107 degrees. Regina went to the chapel and prayed. When she returned, it had dropped to 102 degrees. After that, whenever his fever spiked, the nurses informed his mother so that she could pray. Altogether, Dallas was in the hospital for 31 days. Although he has no memory of the accident or his time in the coma, he remembers clearly the arduous time of convalescence. "They said I'd be a vegetable, and I did have to learn how to walk and talk again." His left side recovered, but he returned home using a wheelchair, not least because of his broken femur. The accident had cut Dallas's throat and paralyzed his vocal cords. Although his speech was recovering, others found it difficult to understand him at first. This frustrated Dallas. "I went to this therapy," he noted, "and I hated it." But Dallas was determined. After 3 months of therapy, he could stand without trouble. In 6 more months, he was walking, and within about a year, he had fully recovered all his previous physical ability. Meanwhile, although he had missed the conclusion of 10th grade, he was able to start 11th grade alongside his peers. The following year, this young man who had lacked brainstem function graduated high school with honors. Looking back, a priest who visited Dallas in the trauma center had sadly warned his family that Dallas was dead. Learning of Dallas's recovery shortly before Easter, the priest made Dallas's testimony the centerpiece of his Easter sermon. As of the writing of this book, Dallas is 36, has a family of his own, and works hard in his lawn service. "I think my brother was with Jesus for a little while," Wayne shared with me, becoming emotional again. He believes that Dallas really was not in his body for a time. "There's no way you can tell me that there's not a God. Jesus didn't raise the dead just back then. I watched him do it in our time." Wayne knows that God does not always heal people. 2 years ago, Wayne lost one of his other best friends, Ronald, who had driven him to the hospital. "I don't know why God does it sometimes and not for others. God has a time for everybody, but I think sometimes he changes outcomes when people pray." Baptists and Methodists were praying for Dallas's recovery. A Pentecostal cousin touched him and prayed in tongues over him. Can I say which prayer helped him? Was it one prayer? I don't know. A part of me wants to be selfish and say God gave him back to me. But I think God really gave him back to make believers of a lot of people. What about Dallas's own thoughts? Miracles happen every day, but when something that dramatic happens, it touches not just me and my family, but the whole community, my school, and others. I think the good Lord meant it as a testimony for everybody. Chapter 12. More medically attested 20th century cures. Are there medically attested cures in the context of faith? I know of no central repository of such evidence, but I've been able to find plenty of samples. Indeed, that is why this chapter addresses other 20th century cures. Dividing material by centuries is somewhat arbitrary, but it allows me to keep the samples in this chapter from growing too long. For example, a woman with a confirmed diagnosis of tuberculosis of the cervical spine, unable to stand, was healed after prayer. Her doctor, who had been trying to secure her a place in a sanatorium, was bewildered to find there was no evidence of disease in her body. Her illness was certain, her cure permanent, and the witness virtually incontrovertible. The witness, John White, could attest to this incident and its permanence, because not only was he the person who prayed for her, and an MD himself, but he later married this woman and spent the rest of his life with her. Healings in Sweden. Besides perhaps Antarctica, No continent has as low a proportion of reported believers in divine healing as Europe. Nevertheless, healings are reported there as well. Chapter 7 of editor Mikael Grenholm's Dokumenterade Mirakler presents some medical records from Sweden. For example, in midsummer 1985, neurologist Lars Olav Ronevi diagnosed Par Ola Malm, then surnamed Carlson, with ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Lou Gehrig's disease. ALS progressively destroys nerve cells in the muscles. It is incurable and ultimately fatal. The typical life expectancy after diagnosis is 3 years, though roughly 1/5 of sufferers live 5 years, and some have survived for 10 years. By September, Par Ola needed a wheelchair. In October, he asked 2 fellow Pentecostals to pray for him. They anointed him with oil and laid hands on him in prayer. The next night, October 31st, 1985, he felt that Jesus told him, "Par Ola, I have seen your tears. I carried the cross in your place." He then saw Jesus carrying a cross and walking away, and he felt a warm current passing through his body. In the morning, he began to walk, and over the following few weeks, his atrophied muscles began to regain strength. When Par Ola next visited his neurologist, Dr. Ronevi was astonished. After new tests, he certified Par Ola's health. In the certificate, dated April 3, 1986, he reports, "For reasons unclear to us, and completely contrary to the almost invariable prognosis of the said disease, we have seen a gradual and now practically total symptom regression. The case is assumed to be very strange." The Swedish Pentecostal movement's newspaper interviewed Dr. Sebastian Conradi, another physician at Karolinska Hospital who had cared for Par Ola and had researched ALS. Dr. Conradi noted that there is a lot that you can't explain medically, including in the present exciting and fascinating case. Par Ola remains alive and well, and Grenholm interviewed him in 2019. In 2003, Sophie Berggren and Ingela Ronquist, later Aminoff, wrote their graduate medical project work about a man who had recovered from extensive skin problems. By late August 1998, this man felt as if his skin, which was red and crusted, was starting to burn. He needed to change his sheets daily because they were soaked in blood. In December 1998, after medical tests, his doctor concluded that he had lymph node cancer that had spread to his skin. The man's friends then undertook extensive prayer for him, including 2 days of 24-hour prayer. A week before Christmas, the man awoke thinking about Jesus, and then was astonished to discover that all his rashes had vanished. His doctor acknowledged this transformation without my intervention or treatment. Nevertheless, on the basis of the tests that had been conducted, the doctor insists that his original diagnosis was correct. Subsequent checkups in March and June 1999 revealed that no skin disorders had returned. While recognizing that believers might call this a miracle, the doctor is satisfied to conclude medically that the overnight recovery cannot be explained scientifically. British Healing Miracles. In his book Healing Miracles, British physician Rex Gardner records numerous verified healings, such as that of a woman supposed to need traction for many weeks who rose immediately after prayer, and the healing of a person disabled from a heart condition. More dramatically, in January 1975, a young medical trainee in North Wales was dying in the hospital of meningitis and meningococcal septicemia, but those praying for her felt that she would recover against medical opinion. X-ray films of her chest initially revealed extensive left-sided pneumonia with collapse of the middle lobe. 2 days later, however, new X-rays showed a normal chest. Because of scarring on her eye, the ophthalmologist assured her that she would have permanent blindness in that eye, despite her confidence that she would be healed. Although sometimes patients' insistence may be a result of psychological denial. The trainee proved correct. Her eye recovered completely, for which the ophthalmologist could offer no explanation. The 4 consultants who saw her on admission to hospital remain confident of their initial diagnosis. She is shown at postgraduate medical meetings as the one that got away. In one of Dr. Gardner's other examples, a doctor examined a Baptist woman's ulcer that was daily exuding pus and concluded that even if it healed, skin grafting would be necessary. The morning after prayer, nearly the entire ulcer disappeared. A week later, during another prayer, the skin was completely healed. Gardner notes that he was one of the examining physicians and had also inquired of the witnesses. I will reserve his documented account of the healing of a girl's deafness for my chapter on healings from deafness. After reporting various other case studies, Gardner openly challenges anti-supernaturalist presuppositions. That God does heal in the late 20th century should be accepted on the evidence of all these case records. He invites those who reject such evidence to ask yourself what evidence you would be prepared to accept. If the answer proves to be none, then you had better face the fact that you have abandoned logical inquiry. The Healing Evangelist. Many cases from the United States appear elsewhere in this book, but here I cite a particular conglomeration of reports. Richard Kasdorf, M.D., Ph.D., provides in his book more substantial medical documentation, including X-rays and the like, for the following cases of extraordinary healings after prayer, though some of these are more medically inexplicable than others. Lisa Larios, healed of reticulum cell sarcoma of the right pelvic bone. Elfrida Stauffer, healed of chronic rheumatoid arthritis with severe disability. Marie Rosenberger, healed of a malignant brain tumor of the left temporal lobe. Marion Bergio, healed of multiple sclerosis. Marvin Bird, healed of arteriosclerotic heart disease. B. Ray Jackson, healed of carcinoma of the kidney, hypernephroma, with diffuse bony metastases. Pearl Bryant, Ph.D., healed of mixed rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis. Ann Soltz, healed of a probable brain tumor. Paul Truesdale, instantly healed of massive gastrointestinal hemorrhage with shock. Dolores Winder, healed of osteoporosis of the entire spine with intractable pain requiring bilateral cordotomies. Dr. Kasdorf consulted at least 9 other named doctors and medical researchers to verify the diagnoses noted in his book. The spiritual context of the healings is significant. Here I take as examples just the last 2 cases mentioned. In December 1973, the stool of well-known businessman Paul Truesdale was jet black and his blood count very low despite multiple transfusions. But John Hinkle, pastor of the church Truesdale had recently begun attending, came to the hospital and prayed for him with great confidence. Truesdale says that he suddenly saw Jesus on his other side, who took his other hand. Equally suddenly, he felt better and asked to be sent home. The hospital naturally ran tests on him. They not only discovered that he was no longer bleeding, but that they could not locate any source for the previous hemorrhage. Truesdale committed himself more fully to Christ. What makes several of Kasdorf's other cases surprising, including the book's final case, is their connection with Catherine Kuhlman. In the introduction, I warned that this book would not discuss many healing evangelists. Because of prior publications medically documenting healings surrounding Kuhlman, however, she constitutes one of the few exceptions. Although I did not begin my original study of miracles skeptical about miracles per se, I did begin skeptical of Kuhlman. Yet, while many seekers who attended her meetings were not healed, as Kuhlman herself recognized, significant cures did occur in the context of her ministry. Kasdorf's final chapter deals with Dolores Winder. Winder's osteoporosis and consequent disabling pain led to 5 spinal surgeries and pain treatment often reserved for terminal cancer patients, which failed to control all her pain. For some 14 years, she wore either a brace or a full-body cast. She was told that she was dying. Kasdorf notes that his medical records on Winder are an inch thick. At a friend's urging, she attended a Methodist conference about the Holy Spirit on August 30th, 1975. She was stunned to feel something like fire in her legs when Catherine Kuhlman began praying from the front of the auditorium. Winder had been unable to feel her legs since her cordotomies. Cordotomies seek to destroy the tracts of the spinal cord that conduct feelings of pain to the brain. But Winder did not believe in instant healing, and as Kuhlman began ministering, Winder turned to leave. As she did, a man approached who seemed to discern that something unusual was happening to her, and she found that she was able to remove the cast. The man was Dr. Richard O'Wellin of the Johns Hopkins Medical School, one of Kuhlman's medical advisors. Not only was Winder healed, to her astonishment, but even her nerves that had been medically interrupted to control pain now functioned normally. She was able to continue her life without braces, medication, or numbness. Perhaps more dramatic are some accounts in secular investigative reporter Alan Spraggett's Catherine Kuhlman. Spraggett is no apologist for Orthodox Christianity. He tries to explain the healings that took place in terms of parapsychology, and he has denounced most other healing evangelists. Yet he and others, including Kuhlman's biographer, Jamie Buckingham, cite doctors' eyewitness reports of instant and public healings in Kuhlman's meetings. Although these accounts do not reproduce their medical documentation, as does Kasdorf's book, they do report the testimony of doctors who were first-hand witnesses of healings. Dr. Cecil Titus, on staff at a Cleveland hospital, claimed that he witnessed, at close range, a 10-year-old's clubfoot instantly straighten during prayer. Dr. James Blacken witnessed spastic conditions and large cysts vanish in front of him, and people crippled with arthritis set free. Dr. Kitman Au, a radiologist in Burbank, California, is quoted by a newspaper as witnessing in Kuhlman's meetings healings that go beyond human power. Spinal specialist Dr. Martin Beery witnessed frozen spines suddenly achieve full mobility. Dr. Richard O'Wellin of Johns Hopkins University observed in amazement as the dislocated hip of his own baby, cradled in his arms, shifted until it was fully healed during a healing service. Dr. Viola Fryman witnessed children being healed of paralysis and blindness. Dr. E.B. Henry was healed of a false joint and hearing difficulties. Dr. Robert Hoyt in 1969 witnessed the sudden and miraculous healing of an eye. More recently, Dr. Raquel Burgos testified about her own medically documented healing as a child. Her short leg grew 2 inches to match her other leg days after she attended one of Kuhlman's meetings. Because she had been seeing an orthopedist, she says, she has medical records verifying her claim. These are simply samples of healings evaluated by doctors. Some other samples appear in subsequent chapters. As noted at the beginning of this chapter, healings did not end in the 20th century. Chapter 13. Some medically attested 21st century cures. Healings continue to occur, as the cases in this chapter suggest. The examples in this chapter include a healing of an incurable stomach condition, severe gastroparesis, a cardiologist's multiple experiences witnessing extraordinary healings, and summaries of many other reports of healing. Some other medically attested 21st century cures appear in the appropriate topical chapters regarding healings of blindness, deafness, and so forth. Gastroparesis. This case study of gastroparesis was unusual enough that it made it into a medical journal. At the age of 2 weeks, Chris Gunderson was vomiting profusely. Medical tests at the hospital confirmed a diagnosis of gastroparesis, which required the installation of feeding tubes. Gastroparesis hinders the stomach from emptying properly. While medical technology can treat the symptoms of idiopathic gastroparesis, the condition is lifelong and cannot be cured. When Chris was 11 months old, surgeons inserted a Roux-en-Y limb, something like an artificial tube to reroute stomach emptying. For the next 16 years, Chris was entirely dependent on feeding through the attached jejunostomy tube. He recounts, "Growing up being an active child, it was difficult to get the hydration and nutrition necessary with a drip feeding process. Divine healing was not an option the family considered, since they and their church believed that miracles had ceased. On November 6, 2011, however, they visited a Pentecostal church in Oregon. The person speaking, Bruce Van Natta, had himself been miraculously healed of a life-threatening abdominal condition, in a story I will recount in chapter 22. As Van Natta spoke, Chris experienced an unusual feeling in his abdomen and realized that God was getting him ready for something. In his heart, Chris promised that if God healed him, he would let everyone know about it. After the service, Chris spoke with Van Natta, and the two bonded over their common experiences of multiple surgeries. Van Natta invited the entire family to join them, and they gathered around. Van Natta explained that he had no authority of his own to heal, but that he was calling on the authority of Jesus' name. He laid his hands on Chris's shoulders. Chris shared with me what happened next. 2 or 3 minutes into the prayer, he felt something like electricity from his right shoulder shooting into his abdomen, as if God was jump-starting his stomach with the shock. He bent over, so Van Natta checked to see whether he was okay. Chris was, so Van Natta said they would continue praying for the moment, since they were not finished yet. As the prayer continued, Chris kept feeling a pulsing or contraction sensation in his abdomen. After a total of 5 to 7 minutes of prayer, they finished. That night, Chris ate his first meal orally without complications. He continued to eat orally in the months that followed. His primary care physician, who was also his gastroenterologist, could think of no medical explanation for this resolution of symptoms, but noted that if the situation continued for several months, Chris's tubes could be permanently removed. Finally, 4 months after the healing, the tubes were surgically removed. As already mentioned, his healing has been written up as a case study in a medical journal. Since I have been healed of my illness, I have had more energy than ever before, and have thoroughly enjoyed the new adventure of trying all different types of foods, Chris testifies. More than 6 years later, Chris remains well. At the time we talked, he had been working as a nurse in an ICU for 2.5 years. Because of everything he has been through, he wanted to work in healthcare, to give back for all the great care I have received, and also to give people hope. Healing gifts, natural and supernatural. Though I do cite other such published cases in various chapters, such as an article attesting healing after 12 years of blindness in chapter 17, and another attesting healings of blindness and deafness in chapter 23, busy doctors write up only a minority of unusual cases for medical journals. Nevertheless, cases attested by medical evidence and by doctors' eyewitness testimony abound. Florida cardiologist Chauncey Crandall acknowledges that most people are not immediately healed, yet once he added prayer to his medical expertise, he began to witness cures far exceeding his expectations based on his past medical experience alone. He prayed with fairly little faith for a man whose lung cancer had metastasized to his brain. All the man's tumors vanished after minimal treatment. A forehead tumor for which Dr. Crandall prayed vanished within a day. He offers eyewitness accounts of a disabled woman, man, and child, each instantly cured during prayer. of a child's deafness instantly cured during prayer, and of the full recovery of a dying woman whose organs had been shutting down. Another woman's large, inoperable tumor disappeared spontaneously after prayer, and CT scan results attested the quick healing of a man's inoperably large lung tumor after prayer. Dr. Crandall has seen the deaf healed, though especially outside the West, and those unable to walk suddenly gain that ability. One Thursday, a man whom Crandall had known for many years came to his office. Crandall had not seen this man in 6 months, and during that time the patient had developed a grapefruit-sized, flesh-eating ulcer on his leg. The wound had reached the bone, eating through the calf muscles. Treatments had failed, and he was scheduled to have his leg amputated the next week. The family had come to Dr. Crandall for a second opinion. He concurred with the other doctors. The wound was incurable. Nevertheless, he would pray. After unwrapping the leg, he placed his hand inside the wound and prayed for the wound to be healed. He then wrapped the leg up and confessed, "I've done what I can do. The rest is up to God." 4 days later, the man's wife called, noting that the ulcer was melting away and new skin was forming. Should they amputate the leg anyway? She wondered. Because a miracle was clearly taking place, he advised against that. By the following week, the man's leg was completely whole. "Can that happen on its own?" I probed in an interview. "It can't happen on its own," Dr. Crandall replied, sounding astonished at my medical naivete. "Impossible." Not everyone is healed, but Crandall has seen so many miracles since he began praying for patients that he cannot doubt their reality. During the year before our interview, he had been keeping notes on the cases. Broken ankle. Carl Kocherel belongs to a Baptist church pastored by my friend and former academic colleague, Dr. John Pipo. In March 2006, after a spiritual retreat in Branson, Missouri, Kocherel was checking the oil in his car when he stepped down and felt a sharp crack. Although he is a Vietnam veteran, he says that he had never felt such pain, and he fainted. X-rays at the emergency room in the Branson Hospital revealed such a serious break of the ankle that after setting the break, the orthopedist ordered him to stay overnight. During that night, though, Kocherel recounts that he experienced a voice from the Lord assuring him that his foot was not broken. The doctor put his foot in a cast and warned him that he would need months of therapy, referring him to his family physician. Kocherel's wife drove them back to Michigan, and the next day his family doctor sent him to the hospital for more X-rays. After receiving the X-rays, his doctor called him into the office and explained that there were no breaks or even tissue indicating where the break had been. "You never had a broken ankle," the doctor insisted. Kocherel pointed out the X-rays from Missouri. "That is a broken ankle," the doctor admitted. But now there was no sign that Kocherel had even had one, so the doctor removed the cast right away. The ankle was blue for a couple of days, but Kocherel had no further problems with it. At church that Sunday, where he used no crutches or other support, he testified about how God had healed him. Kocherel provided me with the radiology reports from before and after the healing, supporting his claim. Sampling many more reports. Who can adequately declare all the Lord's acts of power? Psalm 106, verse 2. The author of the fourth Gospel notes that he included only samples of Jesus' miracles sufficient to invite faith, John chapter 20, verses 30 through 31, hyperbolically adding that the world itself could not contain accounts of all of Jesus' acts, chapter 21, verse 25. The same could be said of Jesus' works today. Various other doctors have shared their reports of healings in theistic contexts. Dr. Deborah Gussman had removed both of a patient's fallopian tubes because of successive ectopic pregnancies. Tests confirmed this, and yet 2 years later the patient experienced a normal pregnancy and a healthy baby. The patient regarded this as miraculous, and Dr. Gussman testifies that, "I couldn't disagree." Dr. Jeannie Lindquist notes that a patient was healed of kidney failure through prayer. Dr. Raquel Burgos testifies of her own medically documented healing as a child. Dr. Alex Abraham, a neurologist, reports cures of severe epilepsy, tumors, heart failure, and other serious conditions. Dr. Mirtha Venero-Boza provides an eyewitness report of a severe burn that healed during prayer. Dr. Tanya Briggs attests as an eyewitness to the dramatic closing of a massive wound overnight after prayer. Dr. David Zaritsky documents the cure of a middle-aged patient who had suffered for several years with Sjogren's syndrome, a currently incurable autoimmune disorder. The woman neither produced saliva nor was expected to ever be able to produce it. After prayer, and without medication, her mouth began producing saliva. Dr. William Wilson, professor emeritus in psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Duke University, notes the healing, after 3 hours of prayer, of a Methodist pastor friend of his who had previously had 75% occlusion of his major arteries. Wilson also reports that a nurse was healed of her depression and the asthma she had suffered from for 30 years when he prayed. He also reports a healing of severe ankylosing spondylitis, among other accounts. Dr. William Standish Reed reports cures of metastasized cancers. Dr. Christopher Woodard testified to a number of inexplicable healings after prayer, which he believed to be divine healings. Dr. Rhonda Wells reports that a critically ill baby experienced an extraordinary recovery within 5 minutes after prayer. Feeling consistently urged by the Spirit, Dr. Dave Walker prayed for Tessa, a comatose toddler who had swallowed insecticide. Although he felt awkward in his prayer, within 10 minutes, Tessa opened her eyes, sat up, and said she was thirsty, completely healed in an instant and with no after effects whatsoever. Dr. David Kimberlin celebrated the inexplicable though progressive recovery of a patient named Casey, and especially her family's deep faith. Scans showed that fungus had burrowed over 7 inches into Casey's brain, so that she should have died or at the very least been severely brain damaged. Yet not only did the fungus simply vanish, but her leukemia went into remission. She never showed signs of brain damage. At age 40, Australian radiologist Ginny McPherson had never been able to conceive. At that time, Ken Fish prayed with her, and, with no medical intervention, she soon became pregnant. After that child was born, she again was unable to conceive for 2 years, so she invited Fish to pray again, after which she had twins. Sometimes some factors add more to the miraculous verdict than others. Dr. Kathleen Farrell reports the case of an entirely non-responsive 2-year-old whose lungs were completely filled by fluid. The child had fallen into the deep end of a pool and inhaled the water. Yet the next day, this child was playing as normal, and a new X-ray showed no traces of fluid, a rapid recovery that Dr. Farrell would normally deem impossible. Yet she reports another factor that, for most of us, confirms this restoration as miraculous. It was the toddler's 5-year-old cousin, who herself did not know how to swim, who rescued her. She brought the victim from the bottom of the deep end of the pool to the surface of the shallow end. When asked why she did this, the 5-year-old responded immediately, "The man all dressed in white told me to." Afterward, one of the doctors suggested wryly that the medical staff should get the family swimming lessons so they wouldn't have to depend on angels the next time someone fell into the pool. Nor is it the case that doctors who report these experiences necessarily reflect a faith bias, though naturally people of faith are often more ready to recognize such occurrences as miraculous. Dr. Richard Westcott, an atheist, recounted an event in the British Medical Journal and reflected further on it a decade later in an article for a book on medical miracles. His patient Jim was a non-religious man with metastasized mesothelioma, a lung cancer related to asbestos exposure, which had spread throughout much of Jim's abdomen. To the surprise of both doctor and patient, after the unexpected ministry of a nun and a priest in a Greek Orthodox monastery that Jim visited as a tourist, Jim's strength immediately began returning, and tests revealed that the tumor had completely and permanently vanished. Dr. Westcott concludes, "A couple without religious faith and their atheist doctor, that is, Westcott himself, had to face the question, if not this, what is a miracle?" Doctors differ among themselves as to what, if anything, they would call a miracle. The question for you as a reader is what you would consider a miracle. I hope that by this point in the book, you have recognized quite a few. Chapters recounting cures of blindness, chapters 16 through 17, deafness, chapter 23, and death, chapters 24 through 31, for example, should provide some more.